Intermittent fasting is one of the most talked about health interventions of the last decade. Millions of people swear by it. Researchers have studied it extensively. And in 2024, a study of over 20,000 adults presented at the American Heart Association found a potential 91% higher risk of cardiovascular death in people following a strict 8-hour eating window. So, which is it? Longevity tool or health risk? Today, I am giving you the honest answer. Both things can be true, and the details matter enormously. Today, I am breaking down what intermittent fasting actually does at a cellular and hormonal level, what the clinical evidence really shows, who benefits most, and equally important, who should be careful or avoid it entirely. No hype in either direction, just the data.
First, what intermittent fasting actually is. It is not a diet in the traditional sense. It is a pattern of eating that cycles between periods of eating and periods of fasting. The most common protocols are 16-8, eating within an 8-hour window and fasting for 16 hours. 5-2, eating normally 5 days and restricting calories to around 500 on 2 non-consecutive days. Alternate day fasting, alternating between normal eating days and fasting or very low-calorie days. And time-restricted eating, any eating window shorter than the typical 12 to 16 hours most people naturally use. Here is the core mechanism. During the fasting window, insulin levels drop, blood glucose stabilizes, and cellular energy shifts, activating AMPK. As we covered in the hormesis video, AMPK activation triggers mitochondrial biogenesis, fat oxidation, and autophagy. A comprehensive review in the Journal of Al-Qura University for Medical Sciences confirmed that fasting activates autophagy by reducing mTOR signaling and increasing AMPK activity, both core longevity pathways.
An umbrella review published in eClinical Medicine, part of the Lancet, pooling data from multiple systematic reviews and meta-analyses of randomized controlled trials, found that intermittent fasting produced significant improvements across multiple cardiometabolic markers. Specifically, reduced waist circumference, reduced fat mass, reduced LDL cholesterol, reduced triglycerides, reduced fasting insulin, and reduced systolic blood pressure, while increasing HDL and maintaining fat-free mass. A separate meta-analysis published in PMC found that after intermittent fasting, fasting blood glucose, HbA1c, insulin levels, and insulin resistance scores all improved significantly. These are the same markers that predict type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, and cardiovascular disease risk. Improving all of them simultaneously from a dietary pattern alone is genuinely significant.
The autophagy benefit deserves its own focus. Significant autophagy induction begins around 12 to 16 hours of fasting in humans. This is why the 16-8 protocol sits at the threshold of meaningful autophagy activation. The last few hours of the 16-hour fast are when autophagy ramps up most significantly. Below 12 hours of fasting, autophagy induction is minimal. Beyond autophagy, research confirmed that the metabolic switch from glucose to ketone bodies during fasting enhances brain plasticity and cognitive function. Ketone bodies serve as a highly efficient brain fuel and have been shown to increase BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, associated with new neuron growth and protection against neurodegeneration.
Now for the part most fasting content skips entirely. There are real risks, and they are specific to certain populations and certain protocols. The most significant risk finding came from a preliminary observational study presented at the American Heart Association's 2024 scientific sessions. Analyzing data from over 20,000 U.S. adults, researchers found that people following a strict less than 8-hour eating window had a 91% higher risk of cardiovascular death compared to people eating within a 12 to 16-hour window. Here is the critical context. This was an observational study, not a randomized controlled trial. Observational studies can identify associations, but cannot prove causation.
A 2025 perspective paper in Frontiers in Nutrition highlighted that the cardiovascular concern is most likely mediated through muscle mass loss. People who restrict their eating window too aggressively tend to lose lean mass, and low lean mass is independently associated with higher cardiovascular mortality. The problem may not be the fasting itself. It may be doing it incorrectly without adequate protein intake.
The muscle mass risk is real, regardless. Multiple analyses confirm that people following eating windows below 8 hours show measurable reductions in lean muscle mass. Given that muscle mass is one of the strongest independent predictors of longevity, this is not a trivial concern. The practical solution? Ensure adequate protein within your eating window. Prioritize resistance training, and consider 14-10 over a strict 8-hour window if you train regularly. The women's health consideration deserves direct, honest attention. A review published in Nutrients found that intermittent fasting can decrease androgen markers and potentially disrupt the HPG axis, the hormonal signaling pathway that regulates the menstrual cycle. Prolonged fasting can suppress FSH and LH, critical for ovulation. This effect is most pronounced in women who are already lean, under chronic stress, or in significant caloric deficit. For women trying to conceive, intermittent fasting is generally not recommended. For premenopausal women, shorter windows of 12 to 14 hours are significantly safer than strict 16-hour protocols. Who else should be cautious? People with a history of eating disorders, people with type 1 diabetes, people currently underweight or with very low muscle mass, people on medications requiring food, metformin, some blood pressure medications, NSAIDs, and anyone under significant chronic psychological stress. For the majority of healthy adults, what does optimal intermittent fasting actually look like? The sweet spot that emerges consistently across the literature is a 14 to 16-hour fasting window. This sits precisely at the hormetic optimal dose. Enough fasting to activate autophagy and AMPK meaningfully, but not so restrictive that it compromises muscle mass, hormonal function, or adherence. The most important practical variable is where you place the eating window within the day. Your insulin sensitivity is naturally highest in the morning and declines through the day. A protocol of eating from roughly 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. tends to produce better metabolic outcomes than skipping breakfast and eating from noon to 8 p.m. from a pure biology standpoint. Protein intake during the eating window is non-negotiable. Research consistently recommends 1.6 to 2.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day for anyone training regularly. Compress the window, not the protein. Multiple meta-analyses have found that intermittent fasting and continuous caloric restriction produce similar levels of cardiometabolic improvement when total calories are matched. What matters most is what you can actually sustain. The most honest summary of the evidence: for healthy adults without the contraindications we listed, intermittent fasting, done correctly with adequate protein and appropriate window length, produces real and meaningful metabolic benefits through well-understood cellular mechanisms. It is not magic, it is not essential, but it is one of the most accessible and well-evidenced hormetic tools available. Done incorrectly, it can cause real harm. One final point. Intermittent fasting is a form of hormetic stress. Like sauna and zone 2 cardio, it works best when cycled, not applied indefinitely at maximum intensity. 3 to 5 days of structured 16-8 fasting per week, with 2 to 4 more relaxed eating days, is a more sustainable and biologically intelligent approach than rigid daily restriction. Optimal beats maximum, every time. This connects directly to video 7, because intermittent fasting works through the same AMPK, autophagy, mTOR axis as every other hormetic tool in this series. The adaptation happens during the recovery, the eating days. Too much fasting without adequate recovery is biologically identical to overtraining without rest days. If this was the honest breakdown you needed, hit subscribe and the bell. Drop a comment. Do you already do intermittent fasting? What protocol and what has your experience been? I read every reply. See you next week.